long time, and especially when they're written on estimates before the work before the work is completed, costs change. Like that's understood. So you would have that flexibility with option A. I know option B is the one Mr. Woodson is very fond of, and unfortunately, with moving the pier, that would make it either an improved project or
Allison. Just for the record, I'm fond of the one they're fond of.
Okay.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
And I know option B would preserve the historical significance of the pier, but it would also fix the cost. So if your costs did come in higher, you're not going to get any more money than what the project was originally obligated. Back, however, I don't know what date the project was obligated, but I know it's been obligated for a while. And then to add on that, you also have to consider timeline. So Matthew happened in 2016. So if you submitted an amendment with this new scope of work to move the pier over, even though you're maybe just going 50 to 100 feet to the side, you are not staying within that original footprint, so you're going to have to dig new piling holes. And because that doesn't fall under that categorical exclusion, FEMA is required to do that full NEPA review, which requires an environmental assessment and it requires them to consult with regulatory agencies. So FEMA, they can't make any decisions about whether or not you're compliant with environmental laws. Think of them as the middleman. And they take your project and they have to go to the regulatory agencies whose legal authority it is to make sure you are compliant. So for this project, and again, this list isn't all conclusive, but it's just off the top of my head, I can see them having to consult with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries, Army Corps of Engineers, and when you're working with that many parties, it can take a long time. I know in the past, U.S. Fish and Wildlife consultations, depending on the complexity of the project and how much research they have to do and what sort of species this could affect, I have seen those take like 6 months. And I did check with my contacts that I have at FEMA and kind of explained the situation to them and just said, in theory, if Flagler Beach went with this option, what would be your estimate for how long just the environmental review would take? And my contact there said it'd probably take about a year to finish the full environmental assessment. And that's just to find out if there are going to be impacts. So that's pretty much the environmental assessment. That's just the research phase. And so once I do that environmental assessment, it can have one or two things. It can have what's called a FONSI, so that's a finding of no significant impact. That's what you want. That means we did our research, we looked in every nook and cranny. This action that you're doing is, as long as you comply with these set of rules we give you, should have no effect on the environment, and your money is not going to get de-obligated by FEMA. Because unfortunately, environmental law, they're very black and white, and there's not wiggle room. Like sometimes, you know, if you, for example, like procurements, sometimes, you know, it can be argued, well, we did it this way, and this is how it's written. But for EHP stuff, unfortunately, if you didn't comply with the law, you didn't comply with the law, and they have to de-obligate that money, and it's a lot harder to appeal. And if you don't get proper permits, some agencies, they do not have the ability to do after-the-fact consultations or after-the-fact permitting. So that's just something to keep in mind. So the environmental assessment would take a year, and then you would still have several steps for the amendment to go to before it would get obligated again and reversioned with that new scope of work of moving the pier over. And then you would also have however long it would take you guys to bid and find an engineer and a construction crew to perform the work, and then just performing the work itself. So I'm not saying that FEMA would deny this, but it is something to consider since this is an older storm. You know, Matthew was 2016. We are getting further and further away from that original declaration date, and the further you get away, the less, I guess, the more skeptical FEMA is of time extensions. But if you guys really feel strongly about option B, I'm not saying don't do it. Definitely, if that's what you guys decide, I will fully support you and I will help you get that amendment in and walk you through the process. I just want to make sure everyone is aware of if we go with that, this is what will happen. Or if we go with option A, this is what will happen. So option A, the biggest thing from that, you don't have to go through the environmental review again. And there is, if you have higher costs, you have the potential to get those higher costs reimbursed. And then option B, it's fixed costs, and you would have to go through an environmental assessment, which could add up to a full year of time to the project. And but you would get to keep the original pier. So those are the only options I can see, at least from the FEMA side of things. And then maybe you guys can come up with some sort of compromise from your side if neither of those are very favorable to you. But feel free, I'm all ears if you have any suggestions, and I'll try to advise the best I can with what's possible within policy.
All right, thank you, Allison. Next, I'd like to ask if Jonathan or Jorge have any comments from the county side.
Good evening. Good evening, Jonathan Lord Fiber, County Emergency Management. I just kind of want to harp on some of the things that Allison said, just to kind of so you guys understand that she used some terms, some government-y kind of terms. I think just to make it, to overly simplify it a little bit, and then I'll expand upon it. You're kind of in a scenario now, you have the old proverb, you have a bird in the hand. A bird in the hand's worth two in the bush. So option A is your bird in the hand. You have FEMA as well as the state who have agreed to fund a project based on repairing the pier stronger to what it was back in 2016. Sometime in 16 or 17, you all actually got a contract through the state saying proceed with this. For whatever occurred between then and now, unfortunately, no action has really happened. So that is on the state and the FEMA's eyes now as, hey, all these years have gone by and Flagler Beach still hasn't moved forward. And there might be valid reasons for it, but that's still on there. And I know you currently have a theoretical expiration coming up, is it March?
March 2022.
There it
turns into a pumpkin.
Yeah, so there's your other issue. Now, it doesn't mean you can't request extensions, and there's a whole process through Allison and through FEMA to get requested extensions. But I also want to caution you, too, if there's no action yet still, let's say you all decide you wanted to delay this for another month or 2 or 3 months, and then you ask for an extension, regardless of which option you go with, you know, the fact that it's 2 or 3 more months with no action, going all the way back to 2016 or 17, there's been no action on this project. So you have $10 million, for lack of a better term, in the bank, it's in somebody's bank, allocated to Flagler Beach to move forward with basically what's shown as option A on the screen. Option B might be more appeasing, maybe or maybe not, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but maybe more appeasing, but as Allison shared, you lose some things. So if you don't do the original planned project using the original footprint, you lose the ability to, they're going to assign a fixed dollar amount to that, as she said, and I really want to make sure that you all understand that. So if it costs, the project's allocated at $10 million, right? If it costs 11, and let's say if FEMA agrees to that other project, and then as we all know, every time the government gets involved in any kind of construction project, especially something this large, it never ends up being that cost. Rarely ever. It always ends up being a little bit more. Always have these cost overruns. As your administrator said, or your manager said, in today's market post-COVID and the current building boom, construction costs every day. I mean, even between yesterday and today, are probably gone up in some scenario. Getting some of the concrete and the rebar, whatever is involved in the pilings and the decking, that's only going to go up maybe not every day, but every month moving forward. That this process doesn't move forward in one way or another, it's going to go up. If it does go up with option B, higher than what FEMA approves that, you can't go back and ask FEMA for more money. If you do, what Allison was talking about is if you stick with option A because it's the original footprint, getting you back to where you are, but better and stronger with concrete, if there are cost overruns, with justifiable cost overruns that are documented and procured in the right fashion, one of the things that Allison mentioned is the fact that you can come back to FEMA at the end, what they call at the end, they can reconcile, say, hey, we ended up being $500,000 over, $1 million over, and then you justify why. Because concrete costs, twice as much as it did when we started the process. So I just want to make sure that you all definitely understand the impact of changing from option A to B or even C, or even Allison hinted a C, D, or E, like even a middle ground. Anything that is not A is going to end up with that cap. The other issue that you do have to consider, if it's not something like A, you're not going with that bird in the hand concept. If you choose any other idea, as Allison talked about, you're going to have to go through all these reviews. And none of these reviews are going to hit your March deadline to start anything, to even put the first thing in the ground or even get an engineering design, because you're going to have to go through all that process. And you have other, Allison mentioned Fish and Wildlife and other groups. That land out there as well, the other issue, I think it might even be in your packet, or it was among the versions I saw, there was even the fact that that land doesn't belong to Flagler Beach. That land underneath the water belongs to the state of Florida. Nothing says, they probably, I can't guess what they would say, yes, I don't know why they wouldn't, but there's no guarantee that the state of Florida says you can have that next piece of land next to the pier. The idea, and in all honesty, whether you remove the pier or whether you're building next to the pier, my gut says, and I'm not a fisherman and I'm not a wildlife expert, my gut says whether you're building next to the pier or removing the pier, there's probably going to be no fishing by that pier anyway, because I don't know many fish are going to come to a pier that's under construction, even if it's next to it. I'm definitely not an expert in that, but I definitely want to make sure that you all understand some of the impacts if you look at something that's not the bird in the hand concept, that is not already blessed by FEMA. And there's also, and the biggest thing I want to drill in your minds too is just to consider the fact that your clock is almost already expired, but if things are moving, let's say you leave today, at the end of the day, you give your manager some blessing to do whatever it is, then at least if you do need more time past March, which again, I guarantee you, no matter what you pick, you're going to need more time, at least you can say in your justification letter, we have moved forward and procured this, we procured engineering services, we procured the building service, whatever it is. At least you can say that in your letter versus saying, we just want more time, so unfortunately we still haven't done anything with it. So I hope that kind of makes sense. I can't speak to whether the county can share with you, but Allison did share the fact that you would not have to do the full 25% anyway. That's typical in Florida for disaster recovery work, which this is. Florida picks up typically the 12.5%. Sometimes they pick up 100% for fiscally constrained communities. That's something you typically have to work with the legislature or the governor's office to get that approved. That's not an impossibility either, or to have some kind of special allocation from the state that would cover the other 12.5%. But your worst case scenario match is the 12.5%. So FEMA's going to contribute 75% of that $10 million originally approved project. The state of Florida is going to pick up 12.5%, and then you all would have to pick up 12.5%. And then anything else, if you were looking for county support, I can't speak to that. You'd have to speak to Jorge and the county leadership about if there was some concept of splitting anything beyond the 12.5%. I hope that helps somewhat.
Thank you, John.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, there you have it. It's all out there.
Did we want to hear from Jorge or Michael or
yeah,
any
Jorge,
of
are you
the
prepared to say anything? Oh, sorry.
Good afternoon, Jorge Salinas, Deputy City Manager. And I think that it is an incredible asset and landmark that me coming from the state of Oregon really like this structure. And we've been trying to partner with Mr. Whitson in terms of allowing our staff to work on this initial investigation and research. So we are in support from that perspective. In terms of funding support, that will have to come to the Board of County Commissioners for them to review and consider this support. So that's all I have to say. Any questions?
Thank you, Jorge. And Mr. Walsh, did you have anything?
Randy Stapleford with Representative Congressman Michael Walsh. I echo everybody, and I'll play a little devil's advocate. Does not mean it's my opinion. But under option A, if you take the pier down, have you determined how long it'll stay down to getting the material in? The impact of that, it could be, I would say, and I don't know, I'd be guessing, 3 to 5 years to get that rebuilt, getting the parts in, getting the delays from the containers on whatever parts we have. What's the revenue loss from something like that? As far as the delays, Allison, I've been coordinating, just getting smart on the program here with FEMA. They're ready to engage in discussion of this Project B, if need be. And I think as far as the delays, there's enough reasons out there why there's been a delay. We have COVID, and I don't think the governor would reject an opinion to extend the deadline. Do you, Allison?
Well, as far as the deadline for the project, when extensions get sent to us, we actually have to send them to the FEMA regional office for them to review. And it's actual FEMA region that will make the decision on whether or not to approve the extension. I know the state, we have up to so much time within our authority where we can approve it in-house, but once it's past that date, we can't. You hold on for a second. I can tell you, I think we're past the state authority for Matthew, but I can tell you what that date is. Just hold on a second.
I guess the other thing from a positive side, what I just heard today, that we don't have to go after the 12.5% from the county. If we just go out, that they're going to take an additional percentage. So depending on how the commission would weigh in on that, that's good news for right now, as we hear, correct? So I would say the risk versus gain, how much of a money revenue you're going to lose because of a 3 to 5 year, that's my estimate, on tearing down that pier without the use of it. And as far as fishing, I'm a fisherman, I'm also the commissioner for fines, appointed by the governor. There's a lot of fish that come to piers that are left out there. It's like a coral reef. And so I can't say you're going to have bigger fish or little fish or whatever you're going to have, but it will be an impact. And it probably, likely, would be a positive impact. So as Allison's looking up that information, I'll go ahead and say, I've said enough.
So I looked up, unfortunately, the state authority date for permanent work, which is what this is, so that's FEMA categories of work C3G. Our state authority expired October 8th of 2020, so that's already passed. So any extensions you send at this point, we do have to send to FEMA regional office. And Mr. Whitson, if you have questions later on about the procedure on how to request an extension, I can definitely go through that with you.
Thank you. Ready for any questions you all may have?
All right, so we're gonna move on to discussion. All right, well, I know I have a pile of stuff and notes here, and want to just start at one end, work on?
That's fine.
Mr. Phillips?
A couple questions. If we have 2 piers, we're gonna have to insure 2 piers. No one did that.
Yes.
Is your microphone on, ma'am?
Yeah, Allison, I'm going to ask you, it would be my opinion based on federal rules that we would have to probably insure the structure that's being built, and then it would become, let's just say we went with option B, okay? We would have to insure the structure that's being built, plus we would have to insure whatever structure we were leaving behind. And then if it's option A, then the answer is obviously yes. So that's my take on it. Do you have a different point of view or guidance?
So another thing that also just occurred to me too, and again, I am not 100% sure of this, but that this would happen, but I have seen FEMA do this. For structures that applicants maybe chose not to mitigate, like if they get hit again with a disaster, so let's say you keep that original wood pier, it's still wood, and studies have shown that concrete is stronger than wood when it comes to like storm surge and hurricane wave action. So FEMA may refuse to reimburse for damages if the old pier gets damaged again because you rejected the option to mitigate and make it stronger. I mean, they would probably be fine if something happened to the concrete pier right beside it. They would probably give you money to repair that. But I can see them giving you pushback for the wooden pier because it's okay, we gave you this mitigation option and you didn't take it, you chose to keep it weaker, and now it's damaged again from the same sort of event. And FEMA's going to look at that as just kind of basically just throwing money in a hole in a sense. So that is something to consider, and I've seen it before where they would pay for something like that, but I've also, at least in the last couple of years, they've been getting a lot more strict about what they consider eligible and have been giving us a lot of pushback especially we're seeing this really right now with Hurricane Michael and Hurricane Sally for certain for things that may have been eligible in the past, where it was kind of a gray area and it depended on your interpretation of the policy. Now we're getting pushback for the same sort of thing. So that is just something to consider, that they are enforcing the rules in a more strict sense than they have in the past. But as far as insurance, I mean, definitely we need to insure the new structure, and old structure need to be insured to even be considered for reimbursement. But there may be the potential that they wouldn't consider it because you chose not to mitigate.
Okay, thank you, Elsa. My second question is, for our portion, would we anticipate taking out a loan? Do we have money allocated?
I would need to sit down with the finance director and work that out, but I would say it would probably be some sort of combination of reserves and loan.
Reserves and loan. Okay, those are my only two questions for now.
Mr. Mueller.
Okay, sticking with the insurance. We would have to, if we went with option B, insure both. If we went with option A, would we have to, and if we knocked down that pier, would we have to pay for insurance in the time that it wasn't there? Clear?
Yeah, I think there's gonna be an obligation to insure whatever asset is there in whatever state is there, would be my interpretation of the FEMA policy. Allison, you have a swag at that? Based on my experience.
I mean, I would tend to agree. It doesn't really explicitly say, at least from what I can remember from reading policy, you know, like, oh, if you're not currently using the structure, uninsured, like, but I know they don't like to see, like, lapse in insurance. Because I would hate, let's say you tear it down and in the process of rebuilding, you know, worst case scenario, you've got half of the new pier built, another hurricane comes and it's a very strong one and it destroys what you built. If that wasn't insured at the time, then you wouldn't be able to get reimbursed for what you already had there, even if it was in the middle of construction.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I kind of thought that's what it was. I think that's it for now. If I have something else.
Yep.
I wrote down a lot of stuff.
I was gonna say,
They're not questions, they're more notes on what was said.
okay, Commissioner Bellinger.
Back to insurance. If you tear down the pier that's existing, why, and then you start construction of a new pier, then you would pay for the construction insurance, correct?
Correct. It would be part of, if you're smart, the way you write your contracts and bids, it's all part of that process.
Insurance.
Yeah, but I think Allison's point is, what I was trying to emphasize was you can't go naked there. In other words, you've got to have some sort of insurance in place while that process unfolds, in case a scenario like what she outlined, you know, happened, because you don't want to take that risk, and FEMA wouldn't allow you to take that risk. I mean, they like for you to have these things insured so that they come in and their dollars come into play after you get your insurance. It's actually, my experience out in Texas was they took the insurance claim first and then they added funds after that if you were short.
I think what Jane and I are asking is, we tear the pier down, there's no pier there, there's nothing to insure. Until
Well,
you
yeah,
start
your
building
your premium would go down, but then you would build whatever insurance instrument you had into the new construction contract, would be the way you would probably want to do it.
You still have 100 feet.
Yeah, that's true. It's still
Yeah.
original.
All the structure from 100 foot back would be no change.
Still have to.
Yes.
You got the A-frame.
Yes.
So, it's been said a couple times, it's been a long time. We have to remember that
not too long after Matthew came Irma. And in a lot of ways, that was way more devastating than Matthew was. Well, in a different degree. So there was a lot of attention needed to the citywide, as opposed to Matthew, it was just pretty much along shore. But, you know, it did sustain some wind damage, but not as bad as Irma. So it appears an economic drive for the entire county. So I would hope that should we get in a pinch and need some money, that we can get some help from others who use a photograph of our A-frame for their benefit. So I don't know. I'm leaning towards A for reasons of cost overruns, if nothing else, because having built a few houses over the last several years, the cost of materials is going nuts. And I'm assuming that the cost of labor is going to skyrocket as well, especially with this infrastructure bill coming through. And to do option B and keep what's there now is going to cost us an outright fortune to maintain insurance on what we have. So that's what I got.
Commissioner Brown.
I'm on insurance as well. On the same lines. And a couple of the questions have already been asked. And I'm just crunching some numbers here. So we were saying that we're putting in somewhere approximately $20,000 a year for revenue from the Pier. And then we're paying another $250,000 for the existing Pier. And one of the questions I would ask is there a reduction in the premium if part of the Pier is going to be torn away? Then there's a savings there, in addition to the revenue that we may be saving by not having to get additional loans for the unknown. Because if we go with option B, I'm sort of leaning towards A as well. I'm a fisherman and I'm out on the water as much as I can, believe. But I'm looking long term, and if we're looking possibly 3 to 4 years, it could be 5 or 6 years if we look at option 2. By the time we go through whatever studies we have to go through, and there's also the risk. I mean, you know, all due respect to our legislators in Tallahassee, but you never know what's going to happen. You know, and that $10 million is hanging there, but someone else could have a very great deal also, and say, you know what, Flagler Beach had a lot of time to do something, they didn't do it. And I don't like to take that risk. But economically, I think even though we would not have the ability for our constituents and the people in the community to use the pier during that demolition and reconstruction period, I think long term the benefits would be greater. And this is going to be done a lot quicker because we can almost get started tomorrow on this project here instead of waiting to go through other studies. And as Allison was saying, it could be another year, a year and a half. And the materials, God knows what else. So I'm leaning towards A as well.
Okay, Mayor.
My question is for option B. If we went with option B, do we have a long-term plan for the old pier? Because we know the structure it's weakened, and once it becomes inoperable or insurable, do we have a plan to remove it, or are we going to just let it stay and become an eyesore and deteriorate?
It would have to be removed at some point as it deteriorated, especially if we had future events and hurricanes, you know, that damaged it again. The issue would be that, you know, who would pay for that removal in the case of another hurricane. If it was fully insured, then we might be able to get FEMA to help us. If it wasn't, if we cut back on the insurance or we took a break there, then that removal cost would be on our nickel. And so, yeah, that's another factor in terms of what would happen if you left it out there, because over time, you're going to have storms. In fact, in the memo from the workshop, this engineering firm outlined the history of the pier and how many times it's been hit. You could go to that page, it says that it was damaged in 1944, you lost half the pier. In 60, you lost 50 foot. In 64, you lost 400 foot. In 84, another 440 foot. I mean, the history's there. So that scenario you're sharing or concerned about is very real. And that cost will depend on your ability to keep the insurance in place. And I'll just make one other comment for the record about that, is that my understanding from Liz, who shops our insurance, is that there's only 3 or 4 companies in the world that insure wooden piers. When we go to a new pier with the new standards, the concrete, the storm surge requirements, and all the new features they have of these things, you broaden that pool. And there's, I'm no insurance expert, but I would think just common sense, you might have a shot at lowering your premium because you have such a limited pool to get insurance quotes from on a wooden pier. On the new piers, a lot more people are interested in that. They're stronger. They're more insurable.
And a wood pier next to the new pier might make the new pier harder to insure. Because it could be a hazard to.
That's what my concern was.
Yeah, and like you said, wouldn't cost us directly to remove it with option A, whereas if we waited, we take on
that burden
cost.
would shift, yes.
Yeah, and that wouldn't be cheap, I'm sure.
Okay, that's all I have for right now.
That's everything?
Yep, for right now.
All right, well, I have a little bit more. Okay, so, William, you said that the pier distance from its beginning was 806 originally.
Yes.
And that was at its longest point ever, correct?
My understanding is that was the original length. Is that correct? Originally 1,000, but what we had in 16 was 806.
Okay, and what is the eligible replacement length?
At this point, it would depend on the PA, the way it's written, and Allison, you would have access to that more readily than I would, and I apologize, I don't know that. Do you know what the scope says in terms of the length?
I will have to look that up. Continue talking, and give me a few minutes, I can pull it up.
And what I'm seeing here, it says it's showing the original length, which was 800.
I believe that's correct. The 800
And it says
but
potential 300 foot extension.
yeah,
Right.
right.
But the 806 is not the original,
That's
whatever
what
it was during that.
Matthew.
Yes, sir. And I think we all need to keep in mind that that's not the total length, because there was also 2 sides coming off it, which adds to the length, because you have a distance from beginning measurement, but your length is also added to by the sides.
Yeah, it would, if you had a T design, for example, that would add to that.
Right. So if there was a different end put on a pier or something, I would hope that we'd be able to add the total length to the end of the pier, because whether you're going this way or whether you're going that way, it really doesn't make much of a difference, but we would need to add that length to the pier, hopefully. Next question is, so when this is done, let's say we hypothetically went with option A, will the original 100 feet of the pier meet all of the new requirements?
No, but you have to start from, some point. And I was trying to think of ways to mitigate the loss and create a space where we could at least have some activity while we're having this, pause on new construction.
So wouldn't it
And the
be,
state land lease is right around in that area, so it makes sense for us to go out that far. And, where the beach, where the end of the beach and the high water line is, and start the new construction from that point. If you wanted to go further back, I wouldn't have a problem with that. It just means that you would lose the use of that area.
the concern is if you have part of the pier that doesn't meet the requirements attached to a pier that does meet the requirements, it gets, we're getting into gray
yeah,
area.
the engineers would have to overcome that, absolutely, yes.
And I would assume that fixing or repairing the original pier, that first 100 foot, would fall under the project. The project would cover repairing what was there as part of the pier, would it not?
Well, it depends on what's written in the FEMA scope of work, but yeah, that's something we would work through the process and make sure that the new engineering firm tied that detail down.
Got it, okay. So that was some questions, and I was just gonna segue into some thoughts here. So thoughts I had, we shut the pier down during COVID, and it had an effect. Right, yeah, Matthew. And it was for an extended period of time, but it wasn't showstopper. The city remained very busy, if not increasing numbers over the previous year. And the barometer I'm using to say that is just business numbers. So I definitely think option B is a volatile option. You're gambling. You're risking a lot. We're not in a position to gamble. We just need to make sure we stay realistic with our expectations. And remember, we don't have a wallet like Jacksonville and Miami where we can gamble like that. If we gamble wrong, we end up with no pier. When I think we have opportunities also, to leverage matches with TDC also. And I'm just going down all my comments, just to share everything. When we talk about financial impact, like with the pier, the city would actually gain money by closing the pier. So our pier loses $250,000. This is a fact.
Because of the insurance premium.
Correct.
The revenues that we bring in, all that piece of business, we're upside down.
And then, speaking from just a financial aspect, nothing more, because I'm all about keeping what was in our character and everything, but from a financial aspect, to hold on to something like that doesn't make any sense. You're losing money to keep something that is not practical. And not only that, but you have to maintain that while the other one's going on. If you try to do them side by side, we just dumped $30-some thousand in just some bolts tightening a couple months ago.
Yeah,
Some engineering.
it was around 25,000, something like that, to do the pier stabilization.
Right, and then in addition to that, that existing structure has sensors on it to warn folks if it starts becoming unstable. There's just a lot of reasons of why it would not be good to leave that thing out there while the other one's being constructed. And to Rick's point, if you have a hurricane and that thing comes down, it could take out the new pier or whatever was being constructed. If that comes down in a whole section. So option B, the city will actually end up losing money twice as fast because you're insuring two piers or a partial, and then you have construction insurance, but then you have all of your insurance, which is what is causing the financial loss on the original one to begin with.
And fishermen probably would want to go out there while there's construction going on too.
Well, they probably wouldn't even be allowed to throw over on the south side of it. with all the equipment. So you would only end up potentially. And then you have also the safety factors. You got cranes and barges and everything else running next to it, and you don't like. It's debatable if they'd even be allowed out there at all, just for risk. And that was all. That was all I got. So other comments.
I just thought of something else. If we keep,
You just lose all
Our
our
mics all dropped out.
I think we lost all our
Yeah, you did.
I can talk about it.
All right. Well, you just.
Yeah, I'll talk about it. So if we keep 100 feet of the pier, is that enough to keep the lifeguard station that's up there as well?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
It creates a small event space in the lifeguard station, which is one of the reasons I recommend it.
What other, Jane?
Yeah, Randy, sorry to put you on.
No, she is.
Well, he's not on the spot, his microphone's out.
Sorry, boss, I didn't say anything.
Yes, ma'am.
I thought I heard you say before that people would be willing to work with us if we were to go with Action B. So, it's nice.
You don't have a mic for a second.
That's probably best for you. But, what I did in trying to get educated on the process after talking to this person is, first of all, who's our FEMA rep? And we've had a lot of FEMA rep changes, and so I was able to figure out who our newest FEMA reps would be, and they advised they would be coordinating with the folks in Tallahassee. I don't know if that's happened with Allison or not, but they said they would be embraced and ready to discuss. So would they be willing to work? I would say everyone's willing to work. What I've heard today, the comments up here make a lot of sense. I believe in everything new is good and bigger and better, but that's also where I think all to go with that. So I understand everybody's point and perspective on that. If I were a betting man, I would say the governor in Allison's office would be more than happy to understand what's going on over 3 years. We can go back and take a look what happened over the last several years for the city manager. Now we have an expert man who has a great vision and great ideas, and brings that from a great amount of experience from Texas. So I think both proposals have a lot to be weighed in, and I do think FEMA will be going to work. But it's the risk first game that's been brought up by the commissioners here, that it may take a longer amount of time, and even having a pier that's been cut down by a significant amount of length may not weigh itself in benefits one way or the other. It's going to be costly. So I think FEMA would be willing to work. I think it's going to be expensive. And so this first game, time, going back to the anchor of how long is it really going to take, we really don't know. It could take, as you said, Commissioner Sheriff, it could take 5 to 6 years, maybe longer. We've seen FEMA is, we love FEMA, and they're here to help us, just like an IG would be saying to you in a military command, we're here to help. But the bottom line, it takes a long time, and you're going back for new approval, new costs to the city, and so you weigh everything you have going on right now in this beautiful Flagler Beach. You have a lot of things out there that are on the horizon to be paid for. So I would use the term already used as a burden push. I have a different way of saying that. It's probably not a proper language. But the bottom line is I believe that FEMA would be willing. I've engaged with them. They're willing to hear and listen. That doesn't mean they're going to expedite or provide a lot more money. And I don't even know. I think I heard, Allison, that the money would not come in greater than what the expected cost for the current. So there lies another cost to this Flagler Beach and or perhaps the county, of which they have tons of money. They would be loving to give to this beautiful crown jewel of the county of Flagler County. So if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Just to piggyback on what you said, so if we were to go back to the beginning, start all these studies again, if you look at what's happening with macroeconomics right now, and then you add in the additional time, you got to keep in mind that we can't predict the future, and you can get into, let's reach out to worst case scenarios. You can get into things like hyperinflation. The state could react and get this very fiscally conservative, and they'll say, well, you're back at step one. We're just going to kill the project right now until things change economically. But I just wanted to piggyback off that.
Well, I wasn't.
Oh, go ahead.
Is it alright if I ask Buzz a question? Buzz, sorry. I know we had some numbers about how much we make off the fishing and the, or, you know, how many people have been out. First of all, I'm not a fisherman, so I have to ask you, do you think that people would continue fishing on the old pier as we were going to do?
Absolutely. Absolutely they would. Last year we made, 338,846.86, which was a big increase. I think the pier is more popular now than it's ever been. Plus we're gonna have lights on it come Monday, it's gonna make it even more popular.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I just needed to hear that from the guy who's out there.
Yes, ma'am, they would definitely fish.
I have a question before you leave now. Yes, but to the issue that Chairman brought up, if there's construction on the south side, that's gonna restrict individuals from being able to fish on that side.
It would, if it's 100 feet away or whatever, you know, they could, a lot of fishermen fish straight down.
Yeah, no, I've seen it.
Yeah, they fish it straight down, so it's not gonna, if there's construction on the south side, it's gonna be more structure brings in more fish. So it'd be like a, you know, it'd be great, you know, it brings in, you know, fish are attracted to structure, that's the protection.
I know that.
Yes, there's a fisherman right there.
I hear again, I'm just concerned as a chairman is that because we are not contractors, so we can't very well predict what kinds of cautions are gonna have to be taken between the old pier and the new pier. Because there are gonna be extensions, there are gonna be cranes, there are gonna be
liability.
all kinds of stuff that's gonna be around the new pier. Because you can't, I mean, you know, barges or whatever, you know.
Well,
So
I was thinking in terms of when we were still in St. Augustine, when they rebuilt the Bridge of Light.
Mhm.
They put up a temporary structure, which I thought they were gonna revive, and have
No, it's
one-way traffic.
It's now structured.
While they were building the new bridge. So I think it's a parallel there, although, you know, not dealing with traffic and all that. It was two structures right next to each other, probably about the same distance apart. And one having problems didn't affect the other.
There were problems,
Well, I know there were problems,
but people weren't fishing on it. They were driving across.
which could be worse.
Not necessarily. I mean, I'm just thinking of people casting and this kind of thing here. I mean, I don't know, it might work, but I'm not going to do like that. I don't see it working.
And you had a couple other thoughts.
Yeah, okay, then thank you, Buzz. I did have a question about using the old pier for events if we were to go with the new pier. So while it was being built, and I know that the museum and other groups like to use the pier for major fundraisers. So that would be out. And we would still have the insurance costs without the money that we bring in for the trip. Okay, those. I know I'm on the losing side of this. So.
We would need to have cheer at the park instead.
Well, it's not quite the same.
Yeah.
Commissioner Williams.
To your question about the structure of the first 100 feet, a lot of money was spent in engineering and reinforcement of what we have there now with FEMA money already.
Correct. Correct. We have stabilized the pier, both with FEMA funds and, coordination with the county. We appreciate the TDC and their contributions because they see it as an asset. So yeah, the pier is as safe as it can be for now. And the question is, what do we do going forward? And in order to take advantage of the funds we have to do an improvement. And I think it will help, on the insurance front and every other front. So that's where we are.
Well, the closer you get to shore, the less vulnerable the pier is, correct?
That is my understanding, but again, we'll have to have the engineer do a full assessment and figure out how the tie-in would and the transition between the existing structure and the new structure would happen.
But not necessarily more stable. You're dealing with tidal surge. That pier, the current pier we have right now, sits 13 feet too low, according to the new code, is my understanding.
Yeah.
So when you're dealing with tidal surge, you're not necessarily safer by being closer to shore. You got wave action going right over it.
Yeah, there's going to have to be a transition between the existing structure and the new structure, and that's an engineering situation that they would have to design.
I guarantee you that list he was reading from, where we lost this much of the pier and that much of the pier, was out there.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And the A-frame has been substantially reinforced, and that's the root.
That's the base.
That's the ground.
That's
ground
the base.
root of
Yep.
And our historic icon that we've got to keep one way or the other, or the other.
That's kind of your gateway, basically.
And we and the TDC have invested deeply into making sure that's safe for years to come. I just wanted to.
Although you can make a lot of money off those letters.
Yeah.
It's some bottles.
That was quite amazing.
Replace them once a year, just like you said.
Any other?
I have one question. There was discussion about possibly modifying the pier to a T or something of that nature. Would that not require an additional environmental study? Because if the original pier went straight out, you're talking about extending it.
No, the original pier.
Had a T on the end.
Oh, okay. All right, all the way out.
Before we lost it in math.
Yep.
So, but if you don't go all the way out to where it was before, and you bring it back to a shorter period, isn't that particular submerged land going to have to undergo a study?
No,
You're technically not in the same footprint.
well, the study went in the 800 foot 800 foot corridor, is my understanding. Allison, you'd have to check the.
Yes, I just looked up scope work. So the original scope work was written. It says the proposed pier is 800 feet long, 25 feet wide, with a 17 foot by 31 foot end T.
Awesome.
Okay. So I thought it was there, but
That's in the original proposal.
yeah,
Right.
and that's what was costed out, and that's what FEMA gave us the 10 million for, and that's what's sitting there.
Great. And then Commissioner, just for clarity.
It looks like that. That was from a document, a cost estimate that was uploaded from looks like Atkins Construction or Atkins Engineering. So I think that was someone the previous city manager asked an estimate from. That's what's uploaded to the project currently. I know you guys are gonna have to bid again, and you may have a different engineer than Atkins, and that's okay. But I will say FEMA did write their scope of work. If you read the scope of work, it says look at engineering estimates. So I would make sure whatever engineer you have, once you do your bid process, whoever the final pick is, make sure they're provided with this document, so they can make sure they're staying in the same parameters. Even though their costs might come up different, they need to be written the same. Like with, for example, this one says 75 concrete pilings. Their estimate also needs to say 75 concrete pilings, so FEMA can make sure you're staying within those approved dimensions.
Okay.
Got it.
All right, my final comments is just, I mean, I'm looking at the tear down costs, which FEMA may not potentially cover if we use scenario B, because the additional, the original pier is gonna be there. The potential danger if there's another hurricane, unpredicted cost at this particular point. We're looking at 10 million. We're not sure what we're gonna get at now. It could be, by the time we're done, 15 to 16 million dollars. If we extend it out another 3 or 4 years, it could be 20 to 25 million. You know, the cost going where we are. The timeline as far as getting an extension, getting all the environmental studies and things of this nature, also adds to the cost and the time, and of course, the cost of materials. So that's just my comments there as far as what I'm just kind of leaning towards those, because I think that if there's going to be tremendous sacrifice as far as people in the community not being able to use it, and I think the long-term benefits are going to be greater than the benefits that we have when using those piers.
And that $10 million was, what the cost estimate was 4 years.
4 years.
Almost 5. February would be 5.
That's why, so we could be at $15, $16 million right now.
And, Commissioner Brown, just for what you were talking about with the footprint, at 800 feet with a T on the end is we'll call it the original as far as before Hurricane Matthew filter goes.
Okay.
And I want to piggyback, I'd like to piggyback on Commissioner Bryan. And option B is still all based on, it's a gamble, because we could have a hurricane come and knock out the original pier, and the entire idea and the concept of keeping it's gone. So we've now increased the cost, have the insurance extra, and it's just the whole entire thing's a gamble. Because it's not to code, it's weekend. I agree, I would go with option A.
Yeah, just one last thing. Our previous city manager put a lot of work into this, and I think I'd like to propose that somehow this new structure, whatever it may be, have letters on it.
Can we, that's.
Well, just.
You gotta make sure there's a structure.
No, obviously.
I don't disagree with
Pretty
you.
explicit about that, but I just something that, I think of it. I know, Mr. Whitson is working hard at this, but, Larry did a lot of legwork on this. And
I think it's just a little premature.
To be the new Newsom here.
I'll go this premature. We'll talk about it again, but I just wanted to plant it and see.
Based on timelines, of course, this is kind of we're stretching this a little bit, but can or will is it possible to have it done by this intent?
If we move now, we got a good shot. If we delay, I doubt it.
That's another factor. If we decide to get into adding a year to the thing, you're not even have periods of time.
Right.
What other questions or comments, Jane?
No.
I know we're gonna make sufficient mad, but I'm always willing to take a make with you.
City manager,
I'm kidding.
do we need to, we have other questions that are easy to answer in the next meeting, but is there anything pertinent we need to be covering that with this?
No, I think we have everything out on the record. Again, if the public has any thoughts, I think we need to make sure that there's an effort to hear from them. And then, once we close this workshop, then we need to, we got to advertise for a special meeting to get that final direction set.
It does say public comment on here, but I was thinking better in the meeting where we're actually gonna vote on something?
Yeah, however you wanna do that, it just, you know, just feel like
Violating
for
any
the,
laws?
for the benefit of the federal and state.
If you're gonna take formal action, as long as you have a public comment before you take that action.
That's what I thought.
Okay, it's, yeah, same topic.
Right.
Okay, I'm good with that. Anything else before we wrap up this part of the meeting and then move into the formal portion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, we're adjourned. Does anyone want to take a break?
Yeah.
Let's do, Porter. Okay. We're resuming.
Turn your mics off, please.
Everybody's pretty used to that.
And I drove by and Allison gonna be on for the next meeting.
I'll stick around.
Okay, thank you, Allison.
Sorry.
We're probably gonna be, needing some info from you. You can take a break. And Allison, you heard we're taking a 15-minute break, right? Okay.
Yes, I did.
All right, thank you.
So she walked in the door, she figured out.
They want to do the pledge?
Did I put it on there?
It's not on here. Is this gonna be televised?
I figured it was back to back. That's why I didn't put it on there. I didn't know you'd recess between, so.
And it's,
I don't
you
care.
got video, right?
Yeah, I'm running it all together on the same stream and the same video and the same audio.
High tech IT.
Yeah.
Okay, this special meeting, the Flag Review Summer Mission Day is Wednesday, October 27, 2021. The time is 6:45. This meeting will continue until all items are complete. Mayor, if you could start us with the pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we've done things a little bit different, and what I would like to do is move public comment up, since we did not have public comment in the last meeting, and because the item 2 is direction of staff. So I would like to give the public a chance for input before we give out any direction. How do y'all feel about that? Alright. So we'll open this up to public comment. Any members of the public wish to speak on the items we're going to be covering, the items that we have covered, and if you just start with your name and address. Last call. Alright, so now we'll close public comment. So, we have direction of staff. There are 4 pointed questions that the city manager has requested that we answer. And I'm just going to kind of run these down because we combined questions from the memo. And so, in layman's terms, the first thing we're going to want to give direction to the city manager is, do we want option A or do we want option B? That's the first one. And the next one will be, there's different management styles of doing the project. So you can have engineers do the entire thing where they get the contractors and they supervise the whole thing. Where the traditional method is, it goes out for RFQ. We bring on a design team, and then we bring out a different construction team, and we kind of manage the whole project. So do you have a firm do the whole thing in one section, or do we piece it together and manage it ourselves? The next point that we'll need to give is, do we want to talk about or give direction about reaching out and lobbying for other municipalities to contribute or do matches? And if so, who and what manner? And then the final piece of direction to give to the city manager is do we want him to file an extension? And is that a yes or no? And do we want to give an official move forward? Yes or no? And we'll tackle them one at a time. I just kind of want to do everybody up. And that covers all the items that was in his memo. And so let's start with the first one, which is the A or B option. That's the elephant in the room. So, comments, thoughts, questions?
Hey,
Okay,
we went through the comments.
I was gonna go with B, but I know I'm losing, so I'll go with B. With A, rather.
Sorry.
A.
So,
But why?
we're gonna need emotion stuff, but I want any other outside of what we talked about in the previous meeting. Anybody want to have discussion on anything? No. No.
I covered all my.
Okay.
As you work through those questions, would it be easier just go ahead and motion on them as you move through?
Yes, that's kind of.
So I'll make a motion that we move forward with option A.
We have a motion and a second.
You want a roll call?
Yeah, let's roll call that.
Commissioner Bryan,
Yes.
Commissioner Belhumer,
Yes.
Commissioner Mealy,
Yes.
Commissioner Phillips,
Yes.
Chair Cooley.
Yes, the motion passes unanimous. All right, the next one is, in city manager, I'm gonna have you explain this one in a little bit more depth and better than I can on the two different processes, if you could.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I understand it, there are two basic flavors here, chocolate or vanilla. And,
Chocolate.
the traditional way is to get an RFQ to get an engineer on board. And I'm going to look to Allison to make sure I articulate this correct. And then that engineer would basically draw up and design the project according to the scope of work that's approved. And then we would go out and that engineer would come up with the bid specifications, and then we would hire a contractor, and then we might even have that same engineer oversee the construction from a quality point of view. Again, all under the direction of the management team here, as you so direct. So that's the traditional method. Let's just call it the traditional method of securing a design through an RFQ process. Is that correct, Allison?
Yes, and just to kind of clarify on what you're saying, I checked with one of my coworkers whose expertise is in procurement. As far as we know, there's no restriction for FEMA for either option as long as you follow what's in 2 CFR 200 as far as procurement. As long as you're following FEMA's procurement policies and then your own procurement policy, because FEMA's always going to default to the policy that has the strictest rules. So sometimes that's your policy, if it's stricter than the whatever the federal law states. But as long as you make sure they're procured properly, because FEMA, as far as procurement, FEMA's only concerned about 2 things: that it's procured fairly and that the contracts are cost effective. So if you can show both of those things, then you should be good.
Okay, and I know that law backwards and forwards, so we're good there. So let's just call it the traditional method, and then the alternate method or another method that of acceptable delivery. And the key is to describe it properly in your scope of work when it's bid, is what they call design build, where the engineer would be secured to oversee the entire process, and then they would go through the proper selection process to vet a contractor and bring them on board. And as they design it, the contractor executes and builds. So the second method, design build, is more complex to pull off and make sure that we follow all the rules. But it is also, as Allison said, an acceptable method, and that's one way to do it. And then the other way is the more traditional method.
And do you advocate for one or the other?
I will do either one you direct.
I know. Do you see the pluses and minuses?
Yeah, you might be a little bit faster going with design build, but I am not as familiar with it, to be honest with you, as I am the first method. But if you want to go design build, I'm all about it. I can learn it. I can make it happen. And because the key to it is to get it correctly articulated in the scope of work. And I'm working directly with the county's engineering office. Thank you, Jorge and Jonathan, for helping me with that. We've already started that conversation. And so whichever method you pick, then we'll just make it work.
So I guess basically what I wanted to know, one way you're kind of dealing with one outfit for the whole way.
Yes, that's design build.
Is there less accountability in design build when you're dealing with the same contractor all the way through than there is with what you're calling the traditional method, where you would have one guy working, overseeing what another is doing?
Yeah, I mean, you're basically breaking it down into more pieces with the traditional method, and I think there's more accountability there than there is
that was
design build. I mean, there's more I would hate to dare say to use the word risk, but that's basically what you're talking about is a further delegation, under the engineer that's leading the project.
And, discussion, Mr. Brown. All right, this kind of makes me want to understand the extension a little better. If you get direction from us and you get a couple more things done before you apply for an extension, will that be helpful in
That's
getting
why
that extension?
Yes, that's
Or
why the
are you
question.
looking to do the extension first?
No, that's why I'm asking the question in this order, because if you give me direction that, okay, go get it done and get it done this way, then I can report to FEMA and the state that I have that direction in hand, and that will bolster, if you will, our case for getting an extension. Right now, there's been, a lot of reasons we haven't done anything. But at the end of the day, we still have to overcome this lack of activity on this project. So I think the more direction I have and the more I can say we're doing something, the better off we're going to be, because there's no doubt whatsoever we're going to need an extension. There's no way this project will be completed by March of 2022.
Okay, these two options, which one's more exponential?
It depends on. Allison, do you have an opinion about which one would be quicker? I don't, but if you have any experience.
I do not have enough experience with that as far as like bidding and stuff. I'm not sure how long that would take. It really depends. I can say I know recently, mainly in the panhandle, so I don't know if you guys have had the same issue, but a lot of our applicants in the panhandle, they've had trouble with bidding and not getting responders to their bids, and that's had caused them to do delays. So, that may be something to consider. I would think with you guys being in a more populated area than some of the rural counties of the panhandle, that you could probably get responses to your bids a lot easier than they can. But that, as far as which one's quicker, I do not have an opinion. It's whatever you feel the most comfortable with. I will say the option that gives you more oversight might look more favorable in FEMA's eyes, because they like to see, the applicant having oversight of their contracts and making sure they're doing everything they're supposed to. But that also could help you guys out and make sure your contractors don't do something that potentially get money deobligated from your project, especially for the environmental regulations. Make sure, I would advise to get a contractor that's very knowledgeable of what those are, and on the project right now, since it's already been reviewed by FEMA, there's what's called a REC report. So it's the record of environmental consideration, and that's kind of like your instruction manual. It tells you what sort of permits will be required and what things you need to consider. So, Mr. Woodson, if you'd like a copy of that, if I haven't sent it to you already, I can send that to you later.
I have the REC report. Let me just ask if Jonathan has any opinion based on his experience.
Very simply, honestly, not really. This is really much more about someone that's dealt with engineering projects and construction projects, and that's really not my world. I think they would be the ones who really to ask that question to your staff, and they've had some experiences recently with construction projects. Just which path has seemed to work better for you all historically.
But you like the traditional?
I prefer the traditional method because it provides more control and I'm more familiar with it. But if, for example, you all feel strongly that we need to go down the soda pathway, then we can do that as well.
Traditional synonym safe.
It's less, it's more familiar, it's more comfortable, safer.
Okay. That's all good.
Any other questions or comments?
No, I think the comments, that the commissioner did answered my questions, and, the only thing I'd say is that with the design build, who's gonna provide the other stuff?
That's why I asked.
Would we have to depend on our own staff to do that, or we'd have to hire another engineering firm?
Well, again, you're looking at me and Lee, basically. Lee, you have any comments?
Yes, if I could. With design build, I've got 40 years of experience doing these things. I even have other project delivery methods that we could consider, but I understand that Mr. Whitson wants to go with one of these two proven methods. With design build, what typically happens is you hire one firm, and if it's a construction related firm, they hire an engineer if they don't have the in-house capability. So the engineer works for the contractor. Whereas in the design bid build, which Mr. Whitson called the traditional method, it's exactly the opposite. The owner hires the engineer on the architects. The owner hires the engineer. They go through the design process. They put the bid packages together, the contract documents together, with someone overseeing that process, some project manager. You know, it could be somebody who is staff. Maybe me, I don't know.
You're looking at the staff.
But then you go through the bid process. And that's where you get the rub, because you don't know what the bid's gonna be. The engineer will do a series of cost estimates as the project goes through to completion, typically at 50%, 90%. And then, pardon me, they put the documents out on the open market, and then it's anybody's guess what happens. You could get 50 bidders, you could get one. And it just doesn't have any logic to it. It's crapshoot, basically, is what it is. And it's simply, at this point in time, it's a buyer's market. As you probably know that being a contractor, it's a buyer's market. So that's the long and short of it. I mean, if you were asking me for my recommendation, I would go with the design bid deal, because we have control of that process.
That's more the traditional process.
Yeah.
Okay, so Lee was referencing traditional process.
Design bid.
Now, this engineering is called design bid deal.
Using that process, we would hire an engineer first. Now, would that, is that part of the cost? That would be part of the cost of the project, the overall project, right?
Allison, I believe that engineering services, soft costs are in the scope of the approved contract.
Yes, those costs should be included.
Yeah. Comes out of the 10 million.
Okay. No brainer.
That's all I have.
Any other questions?
But you gotta do it their way.
Got that.
Looks like we have something. I've seen.
I was just gonna mention,
Yeah, come on.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna mention, you can count on that fee for the design, especially if they do construction administration. It's typically about 15% of construction costs.
Yeah, it's not gonna be cheap. That's why.
No, it's not cheap.
Yeah. Of course, I'll be negotiating contracts.
Well, you're locked in.
Yeah.
The cost is locked in.
Yeah, but I'll get them down.
Any other questions or comments? It sounds like we're kind of at a consensus. Look for motion.
I'll make a motion that we go with the traditional
Design bid build.
traditional process.
Second.
Motion second. Penny, if you could roll call.
Commissioner Bellheimer,
Yes.
Commissioner Mealy,
Yes.
Commissioner Phillips,
Yes.
Commissioner Bryan,
Yes.
Chair Cooley.
Yes, the motion passes unanimously. Next item is lobbying and reaching out to other municipalities or jurisdictions or anything for additional funding. We want to have our city manager look into that. And examples of that would be, we want city manager to talk with TDC, talk with county, talk with Palm Coast, talk with state, talk with Marine Land, anybody that's around. Heck, talk with Orlando.
Stand on the corner with.
Right.
Anybody uses a photograph of our pier.
Absolutely.
Rationale
So we
being,
get money from subscribing.
rationale being, there's a lot of areas other than Flagler Beach that benefit from the pier. Is the rationale.
So the answer is yes.
It sounds like a very short discussion.
Yeah,
Okay.
of course.
All right, we'll look for a motion on that.
I'll make that motion that we, let city manager beg for money.
Second.
You know it's verbatim, right? The motions?
All right, I'll change that. Would you fix that?
Educate. Will allow me to educate, persuade.
Yep, we'll lobby.
Lobby.
Second.
Roll call after the voice that.
She who says in the minutes of the meeting, it went way too long.
I don't even know what
There
you're
was
talking
some
about.
minutes I read today.
Were they mine?
I don't know if it was you or Janelle, somebody wrote it went way too late or something at the end.
That was probably Janelle's meeting. I wasn't here. So Commissioner Mealy?
Yes.
Commissioner Phillips?
Yes.
Commissioner Ryan?
Yes.
Commissioner Velhumer?
Yes.
Chair Cooley?
Yes, the motion passes unanimously. As it was in my Okay. Last item is the official move forward and direction to file an extension as part of that. We have discussion or
You don't
questions?
have a choice.
Yes.
Well, I understand.
Yes.
So,
Well, you can say no.
well, that's not so. I'm not.
Yes.
All right, I'll look for a motion.
Make a comment, please.
Absolutely.
I believe about an extension. So, as Mr. Woodson said, right now you have an extension approved until March 31st, 2022. I will say, when you file the extension, Mr. Woodson, do not wait until like the last second or anything. I would say do it a couple months before it's expired, because sometimes it can take a while to travel through the different process steps, because there's a few steps it has to go through here at the state, and then we'll send it to FEMA, and then they have their different steps, and that can take some time. So it definitely is very stress-inducing when you have a time extension that's about to expire, and it's taking its sweet time going through the bureaucracy.
How long can we get, Allison? Do you have some guidance as to should we put 3 years on it, 5 years on it? What would work?
I mean, whatever your best estimate is for when you'll be finished, and of course, if that's not enough time, that's okay. But FEMA really likes to see in the time extension. Of course, you'll have your justification of why you need extension, but it's also really good to include just the general timeline. It's like we expect to be at this point at this date, and all the way until when you expect to be completed. And if stuff happens, because it's life, stuff does happen, you will just resend your extensions when you need them, and again, you'll edit that timeline. But they really like the timeline just so they can see that, yes, you're working towards something, you're not just spinning your wheels.
Yeah, that had 72 months.
52.
Mm-hmm. I'm familiar with the process. Submitted several when I was out in Texas, so I think Allison and I can work together to come up with something.
That's good information, Allison.
Thank you, Allison.
Would it be prudent to do it before the end of the year since we just made some decisions tonight?
Yes, sir, you're reading my mind. Go out before Christmas.
Okay, so we would probably want that as part of the official direction.
So a motion to ask the city manager to file for an extension before the end of 2021. And Yeah, to figure out how much time.
Right. The extension would have the appropriate, the estimated timeline on
What do you
completion
say?
of the project.
Second,
And to give an official move forward.
I'll second that.
You get all that?
I'm getting it. Commissioner Phillips?
Yes.
Commissioner Bryan?
Yes.
Commissioner Belhumeur?
Yes.
Commissioner Mealy?
Yes.
Chair Cooley?
Yes, the motion. Motion passes unanimous. We are now a go for the Pier.
Awesome.
All right. Any other pieces of business we need to cover, City Manager?
No, sir.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, we are adjourned. Allison, thank you. Jonathan, Lord, Jorge, thank you guys. Appreciate everybody coming out.
You too, Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff, good to see you.